How much of a house can you afford in 2024? I'm gonna give you a simple equation in this video where you can plug in your income and see how much of a house that you can afford. But the first thing that I wanna go over is what you're being qualified for. So the biggest misconception is people think they're being qualified on the price of the home. Can I afford a $400,000 home? Can I afford a $600,000 home? You're actually being approved on the monthly payment. And that monthly payment includes a laundry list of items. It's the principal, interest, property taxes, homeowners insurance, potential private mortgage insurance if you put down less than 20%, and a potential HOA. So all of those monthly payments fit into your total monthly payment that the lender's looking to see if you can qualify for that monthly payment, not necessarily the actual price of the home. So let's break down how this works. So there are two tools that I use when figuring out the rest of this equation. First of all, you want to go to Mortgage News Daily. This website gives you a pretty accurate assessment of what the current rates are in today's market. Today I'm filming this on July 15th, and the current rate is actually 6.82%. So if you're going with a 30-year loan, write down 6.82%. You're going to need that in just 1 second. The second tool you're going to need is just Google. Go to Mortgage Calculator. Google will pull up a mortgage calculator for you. Just be sure you toggle on taxes and fees. This way it'll populate your property taxes and other fees for you to give you a better ballpark number. So let's say you're looking for a $400,000 home and you do have, let's say, 10% to put down. So that'll be $40,000. Then you're going to go ahead and plug in your 6.82%, and it's going to go ahead and populate this for you. The last thing we have to figure out is the HOA. You can usually see this on Trulia or Zillow, or if you're working with an agent, you can ask them what the HOA is, so you can plug that in as well. An HOA is going to vary. In many places around the country, you won't have an HOA, but there are a lot of places like Florida, if you're buying, there's going to be an HOA, and this could be $40, $100. I've even seen it as high as $1,200. But for this example, let's just use a random number and say that HOA is $216. It would give you a grand total of $3,267 a month. So now the lender wants to make sure that you can afford $3,267 a month. Now let's go over to the income portion. This is where it gets a little fun. So let's say you and your spouse are both W-2 employees and you make $100,000 a year. Now, if you're a W-2 employee, the lender's going to look at your gross income of $100,000 a year. If you're self-employed, they're going to look at your net income. So for a self-employed individual, it is much more difficult because if you make $100,000 in your self-employed business and you write off $40,000 to save on taxes for your business, now they're only going to look at $60,000 to qualify you rather than $100,000 like a W-2 employee. So if you're self-employed, over the next couple years, you might want to take big write-offs to lower your tax burden, but that might be keeping you out of buying a house. So I would talk with the lender, go over it with your family, and figure out how much do I write off, how much do I need to make so that I can have a reasonable income, net income, if I'm trying to qualify for a house if you're self-employed. But for this example, I want to use W-2 employees. So if you make $100,000, what a lender's going to typically use is something called debt to income ratio. Now this varies anywhere from say 28% to about 50%. I always use about 40% because if you start going higher than that, it's going to go into the house poor area and you don't want your house to take up all of your income. So I like to do about 40% debt to income. So here's how this works. You're going to take your $100,000 or whatever your income is and multiply that by 40%, 0.40. In this scenario, it's going to give you a $40,000 yearly allowance divided by 12 is now going to give you $3,333 a month that you could be qualified for. So in this scenario, you've got $3,267 for this house over here with your 10% down, and you can qualify up to $3,333. So in this case, you would barely qualify, but you would qualify. But here's the catch. And this is something I don't want people to overlook. This $3,333 allowance is if you have zero debt. The lender is going to pull your credit report to see what your credit is, but also what's on your credit report. So if you have credit cards, a car loan, a student loan, or personal loans, those monthly payments are subtracted from the $3,333. So if you have a $500 car payment, a $500 student loan payment, and $300 worth of credit card monthly payments, that $1,300 comes off that $333. $3,333, and now you're left with just about $2,000. So you would no longer qualify for this home. So what would you do in this scenario? Well, you have a few options. Number one, you could lower the house you're looking for to 200 grand, which is pretty non-existent in today's world. You could put a bigger down payment. Do you think you could put down 20%, 30%, 40%? Also a big feat in today's economy, but that's an option. Is there a way to raise your income in the upcoming months or in the upcoming years? Are you able to add on your spouse or potentially a co-signer to raise raise that income? Or can you pay off your debt? So if you pay off your car, now your $2,000 will go up to $2,500. But most people are going to use this to kind of pull all the levers. You might end up getting a 360 house, put down 12%. Maybe you can have a little more income and maybe you can pay off some debt. So you're going to want to play with all 4 of those levers so that you can actually qualify for a home. But that's the equation that you're going to use. So I highly recommend, if you're going to go and try to buy a house in the next 6, 12, or 18 months, be very cognizant about what's on your credit report. Last part of this, even if you can qualify, I want you to run the numbers of what this house is going to cost you with utilities and everything else included. Because just because you can qualify doesn't mean you can afford this house. So the lender isn't your financial advisor. The lender is simply looking at these facts to see if on paper the underwriter is going to go, okay, I'm going to bet on this person and give them a mortgage. They don't know if you have daycare. They don't know if your wife is pregnant. They don't know if you spend $1,500 on groceries. They don't know how many subscriptions that you have. They don't know what your electric bill is. They don't know that you go on date night or on vacation. They don't know your actual expenses. They are only looking at your credit report. So make sure if you're qualified or when you're qualified that you also sit down with your family and say, now that we're qualified, do we feel comfortable with this payment for the next 30 years? And lastly, make sure these 3 things are true as well. If you want to be financially responsible, number 1, can you comfortably afford this monthly payment for the next 30 years? Do not bet that the rates are going to come down. Let that be a bonus. But whatever your interest rate is when getting this, pretend that's what it's going to be for 30 years and try to pay it off quicker. Make some extra principal payments. Even if it's $100 a month, it'll cut years and tens of thousands of dollars off your interest. Number 2, are you going to hold this property for the next 10 to 15 years? Please do not buy today and sell 6 months or a year from now. You will lose money because of those closing costs, not to mention the closing cost and fees to actually sell your house. You only lose money on a house if you sell at the wrong time. Historically, there's never been a bad time to buy as long as you held your home. So if you're going to buy a home, make sure you're going to hold it for 10 to 15 years and live in it, or maybe in 5 years or 7 years, you're going to be promoted, you're going to make more income, then you can rent this house out and go buy yourself an upgraded home. But try to keep the house for 10 to 15 years to play it safe. And lastly, I would have at least, after closing costs and you move into this house, washer and dryer's bought, the little end table when you walk in to throw your keys is purchased. You want to have at least 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund saved up because God forbid you go through this process, spend this time, spend this money, the down payment, the closing costs. God forbid you lose your job in 6 months and now you're going to lose your house and go into foreclosure and it's going to be a disaster. Make sure you've got 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund just in case, God forbid, something happens. You've got time to find a job so that you don't lose your house that you just spent so much time and money on. So I hope this helps. Please, in today's market, strive to be a homeowner, but be financially responsible because you don't want to be house poor and you don't want your house to be a burden. You want it to be a pleasure. Lastly, I would recommend talking to a lender. You can go to your local bank, do some research, or in the description of this video on my profile, you can talk to my preferred lender. They work in all states except for New York. Sorry, New Yorkers. And they'll help you out. They're very thorough and they're amazing. So thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next video.